I remember walking into the diner for my first late night shift like stepping into another world entirely, one where time seemed to fold in on itself and the ordinary laws of human behavior no longer applied. The neon "Open 24 hours" sign buzzed faintly above the entrance, casting a sickly pink glow across the wet asphalt outside, reflecting in puddles that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago, or maybe I had only just noticed them. The automatic doors slid open with a groan, and I was immediately struck by the silence. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a deserted place, the kind that invites introspection or concentration. It was heavier, almost sentient, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stepped past the counter where stools gleamed under fluorescent lights, perfectly aligned as if the night staff had been painstakingly arranging them for years, and yet the floorboards beneath my shoes creaked in a pattern that didn't match my steps. I kept thinking I saw shadows darting in the corners of the room, subtle movements that vanished the moment I blinked. The air smelled of burnt coffee, aged grease, and something faintly metallic that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was a combination of familiarity and wrongness, as if the diner was both my first job and a place I'd somehow been warned to avoid. I started my setup routine, moving behind the counter, wiping down the stainless steel surfaces, stocking sugar packets, checking the coffee machine that hissed like it was alive. There was an odd rhythm to the night already, a rhythm that didn't belong to me or to any normal night shift schedule. And then the first customers arrived, like an ambush of peculiarity. They slid in without a word, a couple of them holding hands loosely, but speaking in half whispers that twisted around themselves like riddles. "Two shadows on the table, and make them light," the woman said, her voice low and smooth. And I froze for a second because I didn't know if she meant the lamps or something else entirely. Her companion just smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and when he nodded toward the menu, I realized they were asking for dishes that didn't exist. "The blue soup," he said, "and the last toast of yesterday." I forced a polite smile and reached for the menu, thinking maybe they were joking, but their faces were serious, the kind of serious that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. They were mesmerizing in the wrong way, drawing my attention until the outside world seemed to vanish. Even the humming fridge behind me, normally a dull background noise, now sounded like it was whispering along with them. While I prepared their non-existent order, I noticed subtle oddities I couldn't ignore. A shadow slipped across the back room in a way that defied logic, cutting across the faint light from the kitchen, and a coffee cup, left on the edge of a counter, tilted slightly as if being nudged by a ghostly finger. I blinked and it righted itself. My pulse quickened, a low thrum of both fear and fascination, because something about this night, about this place, was making the impossible seem mundane. The jukebox in the corner flickered, though no one had touched it, playing a song that seemed familiar yet wrong, like a memory from a dream I couldn't place. Every instinct I had told me to leave, but curiosity wrapped itself around me like a vine, pulling me deeper into the diner's strange heartbeat. I couldn't look away. I wanted to stay and see what else unfolded, and I felt that same pull might be what some of you feel watching something you can't fully explain. The kind of thing that makes you pause the video just to make sure it's real, the kind of thrill that nudges you to tap the like button subconsciously, acknowledging that magnetic weirdness you can't resist. Time itself seemed to bend as the night wore on, or maybe it was just the diner's magic or its madness, playing tricks on me. Then, just as I thought I might have adjusted to the rhythm of the late shift, a new presence entered. A figure, lone and deliberate, appeared in the doorway at exactly 1:13 a.m., as if they had waited for the world to reach that precise moment. I couldn't see their face. It was obscured by the hood of a coat that seemed too heavy for the mild night, and their footsteps echoed unnaturally, a rhythm that felt off, like a heartbeat being played backward. The diner's lights flickered violently, plunging everything into shadow for a fraction of a second. And when they came back, the figure had moved closer, standing near a booth, and I could feel their gaze even though I couldn't see their eyes. The air thickened, my throat went dry, and every instinct screamed at me that this was not a normal night, that this diner and these people were not as innocent as they appeared in the fluorescent glow. I wanted to step back, to call it a night, but something held me there, rooted to the floor, as if the night itself had chosen me to witness what came next. And in that moment, as the figure lifted a hand and pointed subtly toward me, I realized the late shift wasn't just about serving food. It was about surviving the strange world that awakened when the sun went down, a world I was now a part of whether I liked it or not. After that first encounter with the hooded figure, the diner's air seemed charged, as if it were holding its own breath, waiting for the next move. I kept glancing toward the corner where they had settled, a booth that seemed impossibly far from the entrance despite the small size of the diner, and every time I looked, they were just watching, silent but not passive, like a predator sizing up prey that didn't yet realize it was being hunted. I tried to focus on the other patrons, the odd couple from earlier still murmuring their impossible orders, but now there were other figures emerging from the shadows, people who seemed to exist only in fragments, their edges blurred, their movements slightly too slow or too fast, like time itself bent around them. One of them, a man with a gray scarf that looked decades older than him, leaned across the counter, speaking in a voice that carried weight even when it was just a whisper. "You don't belong here yet, but soon you will understand." I laughed nervously, unsure if I was reacting to a joke or a warning, but he didn't smile. His gaze pinned me in place, making it impossible to look away, and I realized that even the regular rules of conversation, the polite nods, the exchange of names and pleasantries, had no power here. Every word seemed layered, hiding a meaning I couldn't fully parse, and that made me want to ask questions, to reach out, to figure it out. And I could almost feel that same urge echoing in anyone watching, the instinct to comment, to share theories, to try to piece the puzzle together with me. The night progressed in ways that defied sense. Cups rattled as I poured coffee, though no one's hands had touched them. Chairs shifted, sliding silently across the tile, and the jukebox played songs I didn't recognize, but somehow knew, haunting tunes that seemed to hum directly into the corners of my brain. Each new visitor was stranger than the last, and each interaction left me more unnerved. One woman scribbled furiously into a notebook and then crumpled the pages before I could see, muttering under her breath things I couldn't quite catch, words that felt like a mix of prophecy and confession. I tried to talk to her, asking questions, but she just shook her head and smiled faintly, a smile that felt like it carried centuries of secrets. I wanted desperately to know what she was writing, what the man in the gray scarf meant, what the hooded figure wanted. But every attempt at understanding was met with a wall of cryptic gestures and half whispers, as if the diner itself was testing me, teasing me, daring me to engage. It was maddening and fascinating at once, and I could feel the compulsion to reach out, to comment, to type my theories in the chat, to join the conversation. Because when things don't make sense, when reality bends in front of you, the human instinct is to reach for connection, to find someone else who might understand what's happening. At some point, I realized I was no longer just observing, I was being drawn in. The hooded figure finally spoke, their voice low and deliberate. "Do you see it too? The ones behind the ones?" I froze, because I didn't know if I was supposed to answer, or if answering would change the rules of the diner entirely. I glanced toward the counter, toward the shadows that now seemed to pulse faintly, like breathing shapes just beyond the corner of vision, and suddenly the reality of the place pressed down on me. Each customer, each strange utterance, each subtle movement of the lights and furniture, it wasn't random. Everything here had intention, a hidden logic I didn't yet understand. I wanted to run, but my feet were anchored by curiosity, by the strange, magnetic pull of not knowing. The figure stood, gliding toward the back of the diner, and I noticed for the first time that the shadows in the corner seemed to mirror their movements, slithering along the walls and floor like liquid darkness. I wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but instead I could only watch, my pulse racing, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for a notepad that I didn't even know why I needed. I could almost feel that same tension building in anyone who might be watching, the compulsion to comment, to weigh in, to throw out ideas, to guess what would happen next, because the diner had become a puzzle, a riddle, a story that demanded participation. And just as I thought I might begin to understand a fraction of it, a sound came from the kitchen, a scraping, deliberate, and impossibly slow. I turned to see the shadow from earlier, the one I had thought was just a trick of the light, stretching and coiling like smoke, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. It moved toward the hooded figure, but they didn't notice. Or perhaps they did, and simply chose not to react. The gray scarf man leaned closer, his voice a whisper I felt more than heard. "You think the night ends at dawn, but it never does. It waits." And then, the lights flickered violently again, plunging the diner into darkness for a heartbeat that felt like eternity. And when they returned, the hooded figure had vanished. My chest tightened, my heart hammered. And on the counter where my notepad had been, was a single crumpled page with one line written in ink that seemed to shimmer. "What would you do if you weren't being watched?" I stared at it, frozen, aware that the night was far from over, that the diner had secrets it wasn't ready to share, and that the shadows had only begun to whisper. The diner never looked the same after that night. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every hum of the fridge, every clatter of cutlery seemed heavier, as if the air itself was charged with secrets I wasn't meant to understand yet. By the time the last few odd patrons trickled out into the pre-dawn, leaving behind empty plates and whispered echoes, I felt an irresistible pull toward the back of the diner, toward a small section of the floor that had always felt slightly off. The tiles were uneven, yes, but there was more, an almost imperceptible vibration, a faint pulse beneath my feet that seemed in sync with my own heartbeat. I knelt down, brushing aside a loose sugar packet and a few crumbs, and discovered what looked like a seam in the floorboards, subtle and almost hidden. I hesitated, the kind of hesitation that feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that what comes next might change everything. And yet, my curiosity overpowered the caution. I pressed my fingers along the edges, lifting carefully, and the floorboard shifted with a soft groan to reveal a dark, narrow staircase descending into a basement I had never known existed. The air that rose from below smelled old, metallic, and faintly sweet, like the memory of 100 forgotten meals and 1,000 whispered conversations. It wasn't just a basement, it was a secret, a hidden layer of the diner itself, a part of its soul that had remained concealed until I, for reasons I couldn't explain, was deemed worthy to see it. Every instinct told me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to know what was down there. The steps creaked under my weight, the darkness enveloping me until the faint light from the diner above became a distant rectangle, like the sun retreating over a horizon I had never crossed. And then I saw it. Walls lined with photographs, hundreds of them, each frame capturing patrons I had served, or thought I had served, yet their faces were distorted in impossible ways. Some had eyes too large or too small, smiles that didn't match the shape of their mouths, shadows in corners that didn't belong. I realized with a shiver that some of these people were no longer alive, or maybe never were in the way I understood life, and that the diner had been collecting them, preserving fragments of their presence like silverware in a drawer. On a nearby table, a notebook lay open, its pages filled with names, dates, and cryptic annotations in a looping, elegant script. At the top of one page, written in bold, was a warning I felt in my bones: "Do not open after midnight." I froze, the gravity of the words pressing down like the weight of the entire night. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I flipped the page, and the basement seemed to breathe around me, whispering fragments of conversations I hadn't heard yet, revealing just enough to make me question what I had seen in the diner above, what I had experienced, what was real and what was orchestrated by some force I couldn't name. As I explored further, I noticed subtle movements in the shadows, shapes that slithered across the walls and the floor, sometimes coalescing into forms that resembled the patrons I had served, other times dissolving into nothing. The hooded figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs, silent and deliberate, their presence both terrifying and oddly comforting, as if they had been waiting for me all along. They pointed toward the notebook, and though they said nothing, I understood. There was more to discover, and if I walked away now, I would never know the full story. My pulse quickened as the lights flickered again, and the shadows around me deepened, coiling like smoke, pulling me toward a far corner where a small door waited, unmarked, its edges worn smooth by time. I felt a strange compulsion to open it, to step through, but a voice in the back of my mind, perhaps my own, perhaps the diner's, whispered, "Some doors aren't meant to be closed again." I looked back toward the stairs, toward the faint glow of the diner above, knowing that everything I had experienced tonight would be waiting for me if I returned, and yet I couldn't resist the pull forward. And then it happened. The basement door behind me slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls, plunging the room into darkness so complete it felt like swallowing. The shadows surged, shapes dancing and writhing, forming faces I recognized and faces I didn't, and I felt, with a clarity that both terrified and thrilled me, that the diner's story had only begun to unfold. I reached out, groping for the notebook, for the door, for any anchor in the oppressive black, and I realized that whatever secrets lay in the basement, whatever truths the diner held, I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was a part of it. And for anyone who might be watching following this story, the pull would be the same. The need to know, the need to see the next piece of the puzzle, the irresistible draw that would make you want to subscribe and follow every moment, every whisper, every shadow, because the story doesn't end here. The night doesn't end here. The diner waits, always, for those willing to step inside.